Salman, and welcome to our latest episode of In Perspective, where we discuss how climate change, the alleged bugbear of our age, the monster syndrome that Pakistan as well as other nations are struggling to unpack and understand as we have discussions at multilateral forums that tell us that climate change is a crisis, an emergency that will imperil our future. In Pakistan, we are forced to ask ourselves whether we have evidence that proves that climate change is turning out to be that monster. While our daily lived experience in remote parts of Pakistan proves that climate change and climate degradation is really a reality, we are still struggling with numbers, with policy frameworks, and with implementation. And to unpack how best we can understand climate degradation and our coping mechanisms, we have a stellar panel with us today of senior experts who can inform us where Pakistan stands with regard to adaptation capacity and the ways forward with regard to our representation at multilateral forums. I'm glad to have with us the CEO of the the Civil Society Coalition for Climate Change, Ms. Aisha, former ambassador and assistant secretary of the UN, Ambassador Shafqat Kakakhel, and the country director of the Population Council, Ms. Zeba, Sathar. A very warm welcome to all three senior panelists. Aisha, I'd like to start straight up with the idea that we have a policy in place. We've had a climate change implementation framework in place since 2013. And Pakistan continues to be one of the lucky countries with regard to its paperwork. But how soon or when do climate change frameworks become part of our ability to protect vulnerable groups? How soon can we connect this with our human rights framework? And very importantly, have we factored in any gender considerations?
I'll start out with by prefacing that we are living in a very divided and unequal world. It is socially fractured and it's also economically very uneven. Some regions are witnessing unprecedented prosperity and peace, while others are still struggling to cope and come out of the poverty and degradation syndrome. So it is in this context that we need to look at how climate change is going to affect us. And my focus is, of course, you look at the whole picture of what is happening at the global level, but you need to frame it in the South Asian context.
Right.
Because what happens here is what will matter to us, our people, and the communities that live in South Asia. So yes, South Asia countries and Pakistan as well, we have the climate change policy. But that climate change policy was made before the Paris Agreement, before the SDCs, before a lot of other things that have happened, gender action plan, as you mentioned. So it is under review right now, and we should have an updated version that should include all these new developments and how we will be able to cope with it. The issue, with implementation is that after the 18th Amendment, we have a situation where the Federation is only responsible for ratifying the international agreements, making and ratifying, and the implementation is with the provinces. And there's a disconnect in coordination between the Federation and the subnational governments. Also, we have a huge coping capacity issue. We don't have capacities, we don't have resources. So that becomes another hurdle in implementation. With all the goodwill and best of intentions, we are unable to do that, and that is why in the nationally determined contributions that we made the commitments, we asked for financial support, both for mitigation and for adaptation.
Right.
Now, as everybody knows, we are a low emitter, so mitigation is not such a big problem for us, but adaptation certainly is. And the impacts of climate change are going to affect us in multiple ways. I'm glad you raised this issue of climate change and human rights, because the human rights of the vulnerable community and women in South Asia constitute part of that vulnerable community will be affected in many, many ways. When at a glance, when you look at the South Asian context, it appears very rich in its cultural constructs, with social ties, with family ties, with economic relationships, and also assumptions of harmony and pursuit of spiritual over material values in life. But underlying all of these idealistic concepts is the harsh reality of divisions and discrimination. And that is, what is going to affect women and vulnerable groups in Pakistan and in South Asia as a whole. Because we also have this tendency to equate empowerment with economics. We think that, if you have economic strength, if you have social standing, or if you have occupation and positions of authority, then you are empowered. But we need to shift focus from that, because in the emerging scenarios that are going to take place now, more and more people will have less because the resources are shrinking. So the vested interest groups will be pitted against each other to grab these resources. That means a lot of people will get marginalized and sidelined. So does that mean that those people don't have the right to dignity and respect and fundamental human rights? So we need to now, shift focus from economics and put women and the vulnerable group in the forefront of a new discussion that links equal opportunity, equal access to resources, and freedom of choice as human rights issues. And that is the only way in which we will be able to secure the rights of people who are now being positioned in a future with global warming and with fewer resources to be open to more exploitation than before.
Shafqat sir, I'm glad that Aisha has spoken from the demand side. The demand side perspective is always must be brought up when talking about vulnerable groups. But does the supply side take adequate cognizance of where these vulnerable groups stand? Could you tell us where the policy frameworks and the implementation frameworks, as well as Pakistan's pitch for financing, where are these asks right now?
Well, first of all, Salman, we have to recognize that climate change is not some kind of an exotic, imported thing which will somehow resolve itself. It is a reality. It has been happening, it is happening, and it will happen. It has already manifested itself in Pakistan. At the government level, the government has evolved policy frameworks, but those frameworks remain largely unimplemented, and they have not been integrated into the decision making. Decision making takes place either through the 5-year plans or the annual development plan. Those are done according to the old system. So unless we genuinely integrate the decision-making processes and climate change impacts, as we have, unfortunately, you mentioned the climate change policy 2012, the framework for implementation 2013. We also have the climate change law 2017. We have also a number of macro-level development frameworks. There was one in 2011 when Mr. Nadeem al-Haq was deputy chairman. There was one under Hassan Iqbal in 2014. The Pakistan Development Agenda 2025. And you have any number of these frameworks. We become a graveyard of policy framework works which remain unimplemented, and in the absence of implementation, they basically turn into wish lists. As far as vulnerable groups are concerned, I would say two things. On the one hand, the entire population of Pakistan is vulnerable. On the other hand, you have special the sectors which will be more severely affected by climate change. So you have the coastal areas in Sindh, which have already suffered, and there is migration from Badin, Thatta, and a number of other districts both in the coastal areas and in the delta, and towards Karachi. And you know the ethnic situation in Karachi. You've had the lake outburst and Azaban and its discontents. You've had problems, floods. The 2010 flood affectees have not yet been fully rehabilitated. But the most vulnerable, I would say, are the women and the poor people. They become disproportionately serious victims whenever there is a crisis, and we have a crisis. I'm glad you used the word climate emergency and climate crisis, because climate change looks like, a change of atmosphere, a change of seasons, and all. So the new vocabulary of climate emergency is much more direct and much more relevant. So we genuinely need to put in place a system whereby the developmental programs, the annual budgets will be shaped and influenced by policy frameworks and on hopes that given the multidimensional impacts of climate change will become a defining factor in our planning and expenditure.
Zeba Sathar Sahaba, if in our policy planning with regard to climate change, we are often at pains to look at evidence or numbers that provide updated information or evidence of where this needs to go. And oftentimes those numbers are missing about population. So while we are clear that there are vulnerable groups are suffering disproportionately through climate degradation, what is the evidence? And number two, is population an often overlooked element in our policy and planning?
Absolutely, I'm so glad you asked this question, and comments coming from preceding from Aisha and from Shafqat all point to the fact that actually we know that Pakistan can't be kind of looked at as one large whole. First of all, we can repeatedly say, full of cliches, Pakistan is the seventh most affected. One of the major reasons why we are the seventh most affected and not a contributor to climate change is a very, very large population which is growing rapidly. So that's the obvious link that seems to be missing, but it's really coming down, zooming down on who are the most vulnerable, where are the, and I like rather using the word climate change, these climate crises occurring more. And I think the more we disaggregate, the better we have an idea. I would say that we should really go down to the Mosa level, but at least sub-regionally, not even provincial ones, because within provinces there's a big difference between North and South Punjab. We all know that many aspects South Punjab resembles parts of Sindh that are much more vulnerable. I think that in order to really, we need multiple dimensions of looking at this problem, and the data are missing. I would start with just the climate data, which our meteorological department, because we've just gone through this analysis, that it's available, but not in an accessible form. So we end up using international sites. The omission of population from the climate change discourse is an issue that I do want, because both Shafqat and Aisha really interact at the international level. We try to merge these two groups at something as important as the World Economic Forum meetings. The population group went and talked to this was prior to the formulation of the SDGs, in fact. We found there's a group on water, there's a group on fishes, I mean, it's all on air, etc. But they were reluctant to talk about Pakistan, mainly because in the international debate, it's contentious to talk about population, because then the climate change group would be entering issues of population, reducing population in third world countries or developing countries. But in the case of Pakistan, I'd like to again underscore Aisha said we should adopt the whole thing internationally. In Pakistan, to separate the two issues, what's happening in population and sub-regionally. It's not that all of Pakistan is growing at 2.4%. There are parts that are growing much more rapidly, and our most recent analysis, which we literally completed last week, really shows that what we classify as the vulnerable, those more vulnerable to, especially to temperature rises, are those regions house populations that are growing at the most rapid rate. Therefore, there'll be more vulnerable people. They're poorer, they're living in very, very fragile household conditions, with poor education, health, that sort of thing. So I think that my basic message would be that leaving out population is not just about fertility and pipeline, though I think that's important, now internationally recognized. It's beginning to enter the international debate and getting consensus. It's an important actually intervention to building resilience against change. But I think that more broadly, the characteristics of a population, where they live, who's living where, who's able to migrate. Because migration is a huge, as you said, forced migration because we're displaced. That's really displacement. But a positive thing in terms of economic migration, relieving some of the pressures, particularly on agriculture, I would say, is a positive thing in many respects. But not everyone can migrate. You need resources, you need education. So I would say that I hope that, Aisha, you mentioned the policy is being reviewed, but I hope there are inputs from the population side and on the human side and human conditions and poverty, because it's very linked with poverty. It's so closely linked, I cannot tell you. I mean, I was surprised with this one.
Aisha, you talked about women in South Asia and how they become, those who bear the toughest burden of climate change with regard to providing care for their families, with regard to being caregivers, with regard to growing food, whatever nurturing tasks or productive or reproductive tasks they have. Women often have the least support when it comes to climate change and the most affected as well. Could you elaborate a bit more on this in your work across South Asia, as well as how we need to focus on domestic and regional solutions as opposed to chasing global ones?
To start out with, I would say that women are a heterogeneous group. So they're very much a product of the society in which they're born and raised. Typically, what we do in South Asia is that we brainwash women, right from the beginning into thinking that equality and gender parity are foreign and alien notions. Therefore, our version of stereotyping women is that subservience is a virtue. For example, making great sacrifices for the family is an act of nobility that is eulogized. And the film industry has been reinforcing this role, if you notice, of the perfect woman. But since the 90s, there's been a shift, and I think that's a positive trend, because now they're not showing women as victims; they're showing women as agents of change, as masters of their own destiny, as asserting their own identity as equal partners. So that shift in perception is very important for us to make as a society, because we get the women trapped in this web of societal values and cultural constraints, and that is reinforced by some very coercive and regressive interpretations of religion, which at the end of the day make women feel that demanding or striving for equality is either immoral or sinful. So we need to break this mold, and we need to allow women to come forward. And that is why I say that, empowerment and emancipation, the two separate things. You can be empowered, but you cannot be intellectually emancipated. So women need to be intellectually emancipated. And we need to peg this with human rights. And then we will actually empower them to move forward. So that space right now is lacking in South Asia. That requires a fundamental shift in the way society perceives the role. In terms of what Dr. Zeba Sathar had said, I would like to endorse that and share my example of a recent research in which we are collaborating on drivers of migration. And we did, a thorough and comprehensive consultation with stakeholder communities in mountain regions in Gilgit-Baltistan, Baltistan to be more specific. And we found that, whether it's climate-induced or whether it's disaster-induced, population has a link, a very important link, because when they say that, we are moving now to the cities, it is because that piece of land which they were holding for, hundreds of years, owned by their forefathers, now cannot support the size of the family. So the size of the family has increased because of improved healthcare or longevity, whatever. Now the numbers from 8 have risen to 20. So that piece of land can no longer feed 20. So that is a major pull factor for them to move to urban cities. And Skardu is an example of that. In the last 20 years that I've been working in that area, I've seen the population grow from 1 lakh to 3 lakhs. So municipal services are not available for taking care of the needs of so many people. So this will become an increasing trend in Pakistan. The recent report by the World Bank on hotspots in South Asia also tells us that the lives of 800 million people in South Asia will be at risk. And 10 districts fall in Pakistan, and these are all urban districts. 6 in, I think, Sindh and 4 in Punjab. So what happens when you have this mass movements of people? There will be spillover factors within the country, but there may be transboundary factors as well of migration. And all the associated problems and risks that come with it. So we are facing a huge challenge in South Asia, and it's very, very unfortunate that as a region we don't work with unity of purpose on these issues. Because we share the same sources of water, the same ecological corridors, the same airsheds, and yet we're not working together. When we go to international conferences, for example, we're on the same page, we're part of the G77. But if we hold like a mini COP within the region first with all the South Asian countries and reach some kind of an understanding on what we are going to pitch for, it will make our position stronger. Because even, and I think Shafqat will agree, that within the G77 now there are different groupings, different interest groups. So, our region and our issues and our socio-economic similarities make us a separate block. So it's very important that we start thinking along these lines and working towards it, because we are one region, and what happens in one country is going to affect the other country. So we need to look at the long-term future of South Asia as a whole. In terms of planning, I would just like to say that Shafqat pointed out that there's a gap between policy, legislation, practice, that we have a graveyard of policies which have not been implemented. And I'm wondering, Pakistan became a member of the Open Government Partnership in 2016, but the cabinet has to date not ratified that, so it's not become operational. And that is the perfect vehicle for us. 18 months commitments that we have made, realized, move to the next set. So at least there'll be some, incremental progress that we will have, and we will be time bound to achieve certain things. Otherwise, we have these policies, from 2013 to now, the implementation framework, everything is sitting there, and we really don't know, how much progress we've made in any one of these sectors. So I would strongly, endorse that we take the OGP pathway and we make small commitments, we achieve them, and we move forward.
Dr. Zeba Sathar pointed towards, specialized domains within climate change that are frequently overlooked. How is food security and agriculture looking like with regard to climate change?
Well, I think that perhaps food is really the plague for Pakistan.
Right.
I mean, both climate crises and rapid population growth and migration. If there is a common, I should say, center of focus is really food. And I think the food, we can be a bit, I thought that we were pretty blasé about food insecurity, but I was happy to see, I was pointed towards it literally day before yesterday, that even the State Bank quarterly report focuses on the alarming crisis around food. Of course, linking it to a lot of things, but they especially do mention that climate change is contributing to that. and that their food security policy, currently, I didn't even know that this is a food security policy, and totally overlooks rapid population growth of 2.4% because the demand for food grows immediately if you have 2.4%. And then it puts pressure on land, which, as Aisha points out, is huge land fragmentation, this degradation, all those are, climate induced, and water, which I think that Shafqat is going to talk about in this while. So, food, I'm just picking food because I think that nobody can walk away from, in terms of policy, and I totally agree with Aisha. Everyone says, oh, our population growth is so rapid. Why don't we have a population policy? We've had one since 2002. I think other mechanisms of just, implementing certain important things are crucially important. So to me, the peg would be to work on predicting what all this, changes in temperature, how farmers are responding, particularly small farmers. Perception is agriculture sector adapting. Is the government assisting farmers to adapt to changes in climate, etc. And then even with the urban situation, it's though there is a rural to urban migration, there's not food security for everyone in a place like Karachi, we all know, or in Lahore, or in Festival, etc. So the poor that are migrating in are also food insecure. Largely they may be dependent on some food and agricultural links that they have with their rural community. So to me, the policy traction might be best there in the case of Pakistan. Internationally, we may talk, and I totally agree that I think we have in South Asia the experience of adaptation in particular. I think we can really benefit because I think some places have done it better. I won't say which particular countries, I would say some states perhaps or areas in South Asia.
But I'd just like to jump in here, Zeba, and like you to comment on this perhaps, that what we've noticed is that there's a very strong link between population growth rate and female rate of employment. Whenever women are working more, the family size has gone down. So that is something that, when we look at our female participation in the labor force, it's only 24% or 22%. And that is also in the lower tiers of employment categories.
It's interesting you say that because I did go back and look at the labor force participation rates, and because there is a, believe it or not, 24 is a jump from 12, it's a doubling from 12 about 10 years ago. It's largely in agriculture. It's largely stepping in for men. Women working in agriculture, some of the labor force participation rates, particularly in Punjab, are something like 35-40%, not women. So women in agriculture, and I thought how well that might link with empowering women to also help in this whole process of adaptation. I think by nature women are more nurturing, etc., and they can play a more active role in terms of really protecting the land, protecting the environment, or protecting their, even their households from climate change. So, the labor force participation rise, ironically, is not so much in urban areas. We keep imagining it's because there's more visibility, but it's really a huge shift. Agricultural labor force participation rates for men would decline, for women would rise. It's like a crisscross.
Shafqat sir, if you talk about urban areas and the usage of water and energy in particular, could you elaborate a bit more on the nexus that we understand there is between water, energy and food, as well as how our cities, the engines of our growth, are equipped to handle migration from rural areas, handle skill sets which are changing, handle increase in or changes in demography, as well as the energy needs that we're struggling to cope with since a decade now.
Well, quite a few complex topics. As far as the water, energy, food nexus is concerned, it is basically it stems from the fact that if you look at all the impacts of climate change, they converge on water, on fresh water.
Right.
Say sea level rise, It will basically inundate the coastal regions and the aquifers, fresh surface freshwater resources. Glacial melt and monsoon disruption together will affect both the quantity and quality of water. Extreme events, when you have floods, water quality deteriorates. When you have drought, it deteriorates further. So basically, water resources will be the sector that will manifest all the negative consequences of climate change. Now, to go into a little more detail, water is needed for food production and food security, more so in countries like Pakistan, which have a very low level of precipitation. And also the quality of soil is poor. So if it wasn't for perennial irrigation, Pakistan would not have the kind of large agriculture production sector that it has. It was only after the canal irrigation and the availability of water for perennial irrigation. It used to be seasonal. So you need water for food production. You also need water for energy generation. There is virtually no traditional source of energy production, whether it's hydro, whether it's thermal, whether it's nuclear, all of them require water. Coal is a major waster and polluter of water. So if you have less water, I mean, I heard one of the advisors of the Prime Minister talking about the exploration of the shale oil. Shale oil will destroy whatever little aquifers we are left with, particularly in the most arid zones of the country. So there is this fundamental, very operational nexus between the quality and quantity of water, the quality and quantity of energy, and the quality and quantity of food. And that is why there has to be emphasis on the preservation, on the conservation, and optimum utilization of water, particularly by agriculture, which consumes 90% of our water resources. As far as energy is concerned, it's the most ironical situation is that this is a country, Pakistan, which should never have had energy crisis. This is a country which has 50,000 megawatts of potential for hydro. This is a country with at least 18,000 megawatts of capacity of wind and unlimited possibilities of solar. There are problems, of course, because while the availability of sunshine and wind is sporadic, the need for energy is permanent. So you have to have a system whereby in the wind deficient hours and in the sun deficient hours, you have the turbines are working, the panels are working. I am actually, when it comes to energy, we've had a very hesitant, equivocal, kind of irresponsible way of dealing with energy issues. And but I would not repeat those mistakes and say that the announcement made by the government yesterday that Pakistan will go in a big way for the development and deployment of alternative and renewable sources of energy. The target is something like 25% of share of renewables in the energy mix by 2025. In 2030. Now this is more than what we promised in the submission to the UN Secretariat as part of the Paris Agreement. We promised 20%, but we demanded outright $40 billion. But now it seems that after this provocation, the government has realized there have been a number of conferences this year in Pakistan on renewable energy, and as a result, the 2006 policy, alternative energy, has been revised and it has been announced. And Umar Ayub Khan has also said that we will go for the biggest impediment in both wind and solar energy was that we don't produce the equipment, the essential equipment. We don't produce the panels, photovoltaic. But now the minister has said we will go for manufacturing and we will go for bidding, which is both desirable from the point of view of getting the advantage and also addressing the concerns about corruption. So if you have a transparent bidding process for procurement of the equipment or manufacture of the equipment, you will make a significant headway in promoting renewable energy. I must on this occasion register, as I try always to find opportunities to do, that the inclusion of coal projects in the phase 1 of CPEC was a great injustice and a great mistake. You have a huge power project in Port Qasim area. Now all of us know the condition, the pollution in the port areas of Karachi. And you are bringing the dirtiest, most polluting source of producing energy. This is a crime against the people of Pakistan and our future generation. You already increased significantly the share of coal in our energy mix. Stop it at that. And go for renewables and small hydro. Big hydro has environmental and other hazards, and they are enormously expensive. Where will you get the money? $14 billion for the Amal. I would like to see. And if you are able to borrow that money, how the hell are we going to pay back?
Aisha, I do like how Ambassador Saab has spoken about the coal projects. We've had a season of activism in Lahore, where smog is now the 5th proverbial season in a year. It has shut down schools, it's caused emergencies all across. And number 2, are we able to convince governments of our policy demands as Shafqat Saab has laid out?
I think that there is this fine line that divides environment from climate change.
Right.
So air pollution is not directly a result of climate change and its impacts, but it is very important because it does in a way contribute to climate change because of the CO2 emissions and also affects the health and productivity of citizens. And yes, I think citizen movements are showing results, because it is the pressure and demand from civil society that always makes governments respond. And increasingly, I think we're seeing this trend take place in Pakistan: Fridays for Future, climate marches, climate strikes, and now collaboration of citizens for demanding better air quality. So yes, these movements and pressures should be kept up so that governments realize that this is the demand coming from the citizens, and they need to address these issues. But going back also very quickly, a couple of quick comments on what Zeba and Shafqat said. Population is the centerpiece over here.
Right.
When you look at food security, when you look at water resources available to us, we are 208 million, and we never say that we are going to reduce or arrest population growth rate or do something actively about that. And that is also somewhere where civil society needs to come in and start talking about it, because the government, for its own political reasons, may be hesitant to take this up as a priority agenda. But if we say that we're going to be 400 million in 2040, then presently, if you see, we have 23 million hectares of land which is under cultivation. We have a certain per capita of water that is being consumed. And we are an agrarian economy. So if we double the numbers and we have half the water and half the land, then how are we going to meet the needs of the people? And I think another thing that we need to highlight in terms of South Asia is our Himalayan Karakoram and the Hindu Kush mountain range and the huge dry space that we occupy. Now, most people probably don't know this, but the water flows from the Indus, 40% upstream waters come from snow and glacial melt. As opposed to say the Ganges that gets 10% from glacial and snow melt. So our heavy reliance on this, snow and glacial melt means that if global warming keeps taking place at the rate at which it is doing, by the 21st century, the Himalayan mountains will have half the snowpack that they have, which means half the water coming down, which means it will not reach us. So we have to think of alternative ways of also water storage and aquifer recharge so that we build our capacity. So, our adaptation strategy and focus means that if our numbers are fewer, then we will have, better ability to manage them. But if we increase our numbers by 2040 as well and double our population, our coping capacity will go down. We don't have the financial resources, we don't have technology, we don't have capacity. So increasing our numbers really for me means setting up more people for death, destitution, disasters.
Bringing Dr. Saba's view here, what are our strategies for bringing numbers down or arresting numbers where they stand?
Well, ironically, the latest, I put paper policies aside, there's revised policies, but the latest shake-up to otherwise a totally complacent system that, government after government, I cannot blame a single government for several decades, is complacent to the fact that our fertility levels are practically, flat, whereas places like Nepal, Bangladesh, they're half the levels of human fertility. We are finally edged towards 3.6 children on average. The average for this region is something like 2.1, I think, even maybe less, maybe 2. So I think there is absolute complacency, but the ex-Chief Justice, the previous ESP Chief Justice, that when he was especially concerned about water shortages and the building of dams as the immediate solution, also found that there's a huge link between the rapid population growing. Why is there such a demand on water? Why do we suddenly we've gone into a position of scarcity from abundance? And he linked it with population. He took suo action of the alarming rate of population growth. There was a huge human rights case. We were all part of the task force that has come up with some recommendations. And for the first time, those recommendations are being taken seriously. However, there is a task force a federal one headed by the Prime Minister, which has yet to meet. Apparently, it's been passed off to the President, but anyway, it will still meet on Friday. I just literally got the letter as I'm looking at this. However, the provinces are taking it very seriously because it was, we've submitted a plan to the Supreme Court for bringing down population growth to 2.1 by 2030, coinciding with the SDGs. We've done a revision of our strategies. So I think that I have really actually reached out to our climate change leadership in Pakistan, those who are leading in the real sense, to both of them, and they're witness to that. I have sought them out because I think the combined voice hopefully will make a difference.
Sir, do you think there is optimism in the government's action and ability to take this forward?
I don't know, I hope so. But one of the areas that I wanted to talk about, we talked about, is the question of capacities.
That's exactly what I want.
When you intend to go to do something, The next thing is, are you capable of doing it? You know, you want to go up to the Marhala, but are you physically able to do so? And if you are physically not able, do you have a vehicle to take you up? I think there is a very strong need to pay greater attention than we have done so far to strengthen the capacities both of our citizens and of our institutions, so as to cope with the problems and the challenges of 21st century. Our system of education, the skills development programs, they belong to an era that has gone by. So we have to fix our human resource development. In the bureaucracy, there is a serious problem of capacity, and that is why the government has come up with this idea of placing advisors. And I'm personally very happy about that, because the Ministry of Climate Change is one of the candidates for the placement of a senior technical advisor. You would hardly find a professional, someone who was trained to do climate change in the Ministry of Climate Change. This has been happening for years in other branches. So then there is this question of maintaining equipment. You know, most of the water plants in Pakistani cities are dysfunctional because you don't have the mechanics to maintain them. The problems of transmission and distribution losses in the energy sector, the problems of the transmission and distribution losses in the irrigation sector, all of them arise from the absence of the requisite amount of competence in the institutions that are responsible for dealing with them. So I think we need to redefine our entire system of how we educate our children and how we train people for the increasingly complex technical things that life now demands of all of us. And that refers particularly to climate change. All the adaptation matters, whether it's in the agriculture sector, whether it's in the water management sector, whether it's in the clean energy sector, they all require competencies that we do not have at the moment.
Could you identify any opportunities, existing ones in these sectors which are?
There are plenty of opportunities, there are windows. You have a very friendly relationship with China, which is a spectacular example of development of capacity, of scientific capacity, of technical capacity, of technological capacity. If I had anything to do about the defining of the parameters of cooperation, I would put a lot of emphasis on that. The revolution that has taken place, which has taken China from a backward country to it's already recognized as the second biggest economy, but it might well become the first, is basically human resource development, which has led also to an optimum development of natural resources. So, in the case of climate change, the mechanisms that have been established under the Paris Agreement, they were actually envisaged earlier in the Copenhagen Agreement. There is a technology mechanism whose job is capacity building. In renewable energy, you have the International Renewable Energy Agency, ARENA, which actually produced a report called Assessment of Pakistan's Readiness for Renewables in April this year. It is in April last year. The recommendations, the policy document that was announced yesterday contains a number of suggestions which came from the 2018 study of ARENA. So there are plenty of opportunities for securing support and assistance. We only go for balance of payment support, which is not really the way to do things.
That's right. Aisha, while we're talking about opportunities, are there any opportunities to mainstream marginalized groups, women, into the climate action fold by giving them opportunities to negotiate, by bringing them to forums that matter, by creating leaderships? Also, if you could reflect on the point raised by Ambassador Saab on the climate financing aspect of things, what is your view?
I think there are tremendous opportunities, that are open for the marginalized and for the women, because I work with rural communities in mountain areas, and I see that, the young generation has a lot of hopes and aspirations, and they're rearing to go and achieve something. So I think, we have a lot of doom and gloom scenarios right now because of the way things are happening, but the positive aspects are that we have a government now that is taking political ownership. You've seen that, in the statement the Prime Minister made at the UN Climate Summit. He talked about climate change. He's been talking about that, when he was part of the KP government also, the million tree and billion tree tsunamis and 10 billion tree tsunami. Now he's launching the Clean Green Pakistan and, the ecological restoration initiative. So all these are indications that yes, the heart is in the right place. Now whether we have capacities and resources, that is a separate issue. But in terms of, I think, co-opting the marginalized and creating special opportunities for women, the government still needs to work on the gender action plan, and that is the time when they should get, input from different stakeholders to see what would be the best way to do that. And again, I come back to the OGP thing, because that becomes place-based and people-centered. And when you're co-creating policies, you're automatically getting input from the people on how it should be done. And at the end of the day, if you have ownership, collective ownership of something, and that is why collaboration with civil society is extremely important. When they collaborate more, and the open government, is the perfect vehicle for that, they will themselves come up with solutions for which they have civil society as partners, and then perhaps implementation will also become easier. So I think, we have opportunities. It is how we utilize them and how much space we give to civil society, and recognizing that both government and civil society operate in different spaces and different domains. I think respecting each one's autonomy and independence, there is space for collaboration. And to me, I think there's nothing better or no better way to achieve harmonized outcomes other than through collaborations. So yes, definitely, and some programs should only be open for women-driven organizations, programs of the women, for the women, by the women kind of an approach, in which you then ensure that only women organizations and beneficiaries will also be women. So there are lots of different ways, to look into this. But when the gender action plan is being formulated, that is the time when stakeholder consultations can throw up more ideas.
Dr. Zeba, in your conclusion, would you have any
I would say also I'm optimistic, because I totally agree with Aisha. Give power to the women, and really honestly, at the household level, at the societal level, change will happen. It's precisely because they don't have that power in the household. I mentioned the increasing role of women in agriculture. I think that's an opportunity, but give them the power. They're often not even considered the heads of household, though they're doing the major part of the work. So I think, again, empowering them not just, through rights, and I think that's very, very important. I think the governmental level, in terms of frameworks, and I think is really important. It is more of, and should be the main financier. However, I think the action happens at the community level. I think that more empowerment through better services and opportunity in real terms, not just, we've given you the right, well, great, I don't even have access to the basic water, sanitation, and particularly health services. We talked extensively about the population issue. It's basically a service delivery issue. Our health services do not include family a part of the maternal child, and we've costed that out. We're already spending about 1,500 million, the government itself, public service, spending $1,500 million in Pakistan annually. need to spend something like 500 million more to give everyone a full set of services. It's not rocket science, it's not undoable. I think it's a question of really, there was a comment about intent. Intent has to be visible and vocal. And it has to be financed as well. Not wholly, but at least partially by the government. And the rest ought to be quickly. And I think, as I said, if programs, even for adaptation, are led by women, I do see, or young people and women, I think they're going to provide the leadership. I'm sorry to say it because I've not been. I think we get the status quo when, and I do agree with you, improving the capacity of ministries. They don't have, the health ministry just does not have any specialized people in it. So,
Shafqat sir, you have the last word. Pakistan is making a bid at COP25 in a couple of days now. While we make a bid for finance and other adaptive capacities abroad, what pitch does Pakistan need to make internally? If there are any medium-term opportunities that we can grab, please lay them out for us.
Yeah. Well, being Pakistan for years has not been a major player in the negotiations.
Right.
So we try to use the COPs, the annual conferences of parties, for basically projecting the positive elements of our policies. And I think at the forthcoming COP25, we have more credible stories to tell. We should tell the story of the billion-tree so-called tsunami. I call it the billion-tree campaign that was carried out in Capita. And we should talk about it was by and large a successful campaign, and now the federal government wants to expand it to the federation. That should be done. The campaign for tree planting will also help achieve the marginalized growth. How did the marginalized people go to the margin? They went to the margin because of denial of opportunities, employment, and improvement of their status. So if you engage them in activities like tree planting, waste collection and management, and all environment-related services, you will actually lift the marginalized group. And the other point I would like to, so we should project this policy document should be finalized. I'm not sure if it hasn't been consulted. There is still time for consultations. The last thing I would like to say basically is women empowerment. Unless and until you empower women, you cannot resolve the problem of climate change or population. How did Bangladesh resolve its population crisis? It is now at 1.6% or 1.5% from 2.4, 2.5% at the time of their liberation. How did Bangladesh become the most dynamic developing country in South Asia with a growth rate of 8%, which is more than India's now reduced growth rate of 5%, and Pakistan's something like between 2.5% to 3%. It was the women empowerment, because when they started producing garments and all that, taking advantage of their status as an LDC, they decided women will be doing the machines and all, men will be carrying the stuff to the port for export. So, by a simple gesture, now women are not producing the 5 or 6 children they were producing, they are stopping at 2.
but they also
There
have
is a direct correlation between empowerment and population rationalization or population reduction. So, in this, in Pakistan, I think the brightest thing is I think our women are far more capable and far more progress have done are many.
I think we all agree with that. And in the season to be telling credible stories abroad or within Pakistan, I think it's time that Pakistan is able to tell a true story about its women and marginalized groups, whether at multilateral forums or with evidence within. Thank you for staying with us for this episode of In Perspective. We'll be back with more. Thank you.
We tell Salman,